West Caribbean Airways Flight 708, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, took off from Tocumen International Airport in Panama City on the early morning of August 16, 2005. It was a charter flight carrying 160 people, 152 passengers and 8 crew, bound for Martinique. The passengers, mostly vacationers and families, were relaxed, unaware that within minutes they would be facing one of the deadliest aviation disasters in Caribbean history. Inside the cockpit, Captain Omar Ospina and First Officer Eduardo Lopez were professionals, experienced in handling the MD-82. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude at 31,000 feet, everything seemed normal. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, serving drinks, and passengers enjoyed the quiet hum of the engines. However, unknown to the crew, a serious issue was already developing. Due to severe weather conditions they were climbing through, turbulence and ice was beginning to form on the aircraft's wings. This ice buildup would soon have devastating consequences. Moments later, the aircraft began losing airspeed, but the pilots didn't realize the full extent of the problem. The aircraft's engines continued working normally, and no alarms were triggered yet. But something was terribly wrong. The plane was gradually stalling, and no one had noticed. As Flight 708 continued its journey, the pilots received a warning from air traffic control in Venezuela. Controllers advised the crew that they were experiencing bad weather ahead and that they should adjust their altitude accordingly. Captain Ospina acknowledged the message and initiated a slow climb to 33,000 feet, thinking they were simply avoiding turbulence. But what the pilots didn't realize was that their airspeed was dangerously low. The MD-82 required a certain level of thrust and airflow over the wings to maintain flight. However, due to severe icing, the wings were no longer generating enough lift. Suddenly, the stick shaker, a violent rattling of the control column, activated, signaling an imminent stall. Stall! Stall! The aircraft's warning system blared. Panic surged through the cockpit as the pilot struggled to regain control. Captain Ospina instinctively pulled back on the controls, trying to lift the nose. But that was the worst thing to do in a stall. Instead of recovering, the plane began to lose altitude at an alarming rate. Passengers felt a terrifying drop as the plane plunged through the sky. Flight attendants screamed for everyone to remain calm, but chaos was spreading as people realized something was terribly wrong. With the plane in a full stall, the MD-82 entered a rapid descent, plummeting thousands of feet per minute. The once calm atmosphere in the cabin had turned into sheer panic. Passengers screamed, clutching their armrests, some praying, others crying as the aircraft shuddered violently in freefall. Inside the cockpit, the pilots frantically tried to regain control. "Power up! Power up!" shouted First Officer Lopez, realizing they needed to increase engine thrust to recover. But at this point, the engines were at full power. The problem wasn't the engines. It was that the airplane was aerodynamically dead. The ground proximity warning system, GPWS, blared through the cockpit. "Terrain! Terrain! Pull up!" But nothing worked. The aircraft had fallen into an unrecoverable deep stall. The passengers, pinned against their seats by the forces of the descent, had little understanding of what was happening. But they knew one thing. The plane was falling. The aircraft had now dropped below 15,000 feet, still plummeting. Air traffic controllers tried desperately to contact the pilots, but no response. Flight 708 was in freefall, heading straight for disaster. At 7:45 a.m., the aircraft continued its uncontrolled descent, now below 10,000 feet. The pilots, desperate, made one last attempt to recover by pitching the nose down slightly, hoping to regain airflow over the wings. But it was too late. The MD-82, still stalled, was now falling at over 7,000 feet per minute. The mountainous terrain of western Venezuela loomed closer and closer. "We're going to crash," a flight attendant screamed as the aircraft raced toward the ground. The cockpit voice recorder, CVR, captured the final horrifying seconds. Captain Ospina. "Push forward, push forward." First Officer Lopez. "It's not responding. We're 2E. WDPWS warning. Pull up, pull up." Then, Impact Flight 708 crashed into a remote mountainous region in Venezuela, instantly killing all 160 people on board. The aircraft was obliterated, with debris scattered across a wide area. Smoke and fire rose into the sky, signaling the tragic end of a flight that was doomed from the moment it stalled. Rescue teams and investigators rushed to the crash site. The scene was devastating. There were no survivors, only wreckage and haunting. Silence in the jungle. As investigators recovered the black boxes, they began piecing together what had happened. The data revealed a shocking truth. The aircraft had been in a deep stall for nearly 3 minutes before impact. The crew had failed to recognize the stall in time. The icing on the wings had drastically reduced lift, but the pilots were unaware of its full effect. The decision to climb to 33,000 feet had only worsened the situation, making recovery impossible. The pilots had pulled back on the controls instead of pushing forward, sealing the aircraft's fate. Aviation experts determined that better pilot training and stall recovery procedures could have prevented the disaster. West Caribbean Airways' poor safety record also came under scrutiny, with investigations revealing serious concerns about pilot fatigue and inadequate training programs. The crash of Flight 708 became a case study in the importance of stall, awareness, and recovery techniques, leading to major changes in training worldwide. But for the families of the victims, the investigation could never undo the loss of their loved ones. 160 lives had been lost, and for them, the horror of that tragic morning would never fade. West Caribbean Airways Flight 708 had fallen through the sky, completely powerless to stop its fate. Hours after the crash of West Caribbean Airways Flight 708, search and rescue teams mobilized from Venezuela, Martinique, and Colombia to locate the wreckage. Dense jungle and rugged mountainous terrain made the search difficult, but at first, light, aerial reconnaissance teams spotted smoldering wreckage scattered across a vast area. The devastation was complete. No survivors were found. On the ground, rescue workers navigated through thick vegetation and dangerous slopes. The impact had been catastrophic. The aircraft was unrecognizable, with only small fragments of the fuselage still intact. The eerie silence of the crash site was broken only by the crackling of flames still consuming the wreckage. Personal belongings, luggage, shoes, even children's toys, were strewn across the ground, silent reminders of the human lives lost in the tragedy. As investigators arrived, their first goal was to locate the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data, recorder, FDR. These would be crucial in determining what had happened in the final moments of Flight 708. But even before forensic analysis, one thing was certain. This was a high-speed impact, and the aircraft had been in an uncontrollable descent when it crashed. As news of the crash reached Martinique, Panama, and Colombia, the families of the victims gathered at airports and airline offices, desperate for information. Many had waved goodbye to their loved ones just hours before, expecting them to return safely. Now, they faced agonizing uncertainty. In Martinique, where most of the passengers were from, a crisis center was established. Airline representatives, government officials, and grief counselors tried to assist families, but the lack of immediate answers only fueled their distress. The horror of realizing that no one had survived shattered many. At the airports, wailing cries filled the terminals as authorities began confirming the worst news imaginable. Families collapsed in grief, while others demanded to know why this had happened. How could a commercial airliner fall from the sky without warning? Amid the grief, questions of accountability arose. Could West Caribbean Airways have prevented this disaster? Was there a technical fault, pilot error, or negligence involved? The world demanded answers, and the official investigation had just begun. The crash of Flight 708 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. The MD-82 was a well-known aircraft, but this accident raised serious concerns about stall recovery training and pilot response procedures in emergencies. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and aviation safety agencies worldwide immediately began re-evaluating stall prevention training. Airlines operating McDonnell Douglas MD-80 series aircraft were urged to review their stall recovery procedures and ensure pilots were adequately trained for high-altitude stall situations. West Caribbean Airways, already facing financial struggles and safety concerns, was thrown into a public relations crisis. The airline's reputation plummeted, with media outlets scrutinizing its safety record. Aviation experts began examining the airline's maintenance logs, training programs, and operational procedures, looking for signs of negligence. Would this crash expose deeper issues within the airline? Investigators needed to dig deeper to find the truth. Weeks after the crash, investigators successfully recovered the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and flight data recorder, FDR, from the wreckage. The devices were badly damaged but contained enough data to reconstruct the final moments of flight. Avicios 8. What the recordings revealed was horrifying. The pilots had been unaware of the severity of the stall until it was too late to recover. Their actions, pulling back instead of pushing forward, worsened the situation. The MD-82 remained in a deep stall for nearly 3 minutes before impact. Most chilling was the cockpit voice recording. In the final 60 seconds, the sheer panic in the pilots' voices was evident. They fought to regain control, but their lack of understanding of the stall dynamics sealed their fate. Power up, power up. We're not climbing. What's happening? Pull up, stall, stall. Then silence. The investigators sat in stunned silence as they realized the truth. Flight 708 had been doomed from the moment the stall began. In the aftermath of the crash, major changes were made to stall recovery. Training worldwide. Aviation authorities mandated improved stall recognition and recovery procedures for all pilots operating commercial jets. West Caribbean Airways, unable to recover from the tragedy and public backlash, ceased operations within months of the disaster. The airline's failure to prioritize proper pilot training was seen as a major contributing factor to the accident. For the families of the victims, no amount of regulatory changes could bring back their loved ones. However, their voices helped push for stronger aviation safety measures, ensuring that future pilots would never make the same mistake. Today, Flight 708 is remembered as a tragic lesson in the importance of proper training, situational awareness, and quick decision-making in emergencies. It remains one of the deadliest aviation disasters in the Caribbean, forever etched in history. The world learned from it, but at the cost of 160 innocent lives.